All right, well, welcome everyone, and thanks so much for being able to join us here right now in this space, and for those who might be joining in later on and watching the recording. So just really want to say thanks so much. I know that some of y'all were here for our very first part 1 webinar, and it's good to see a lot of some new faces in this space as well. So very excited to have you all with us. But today, Emily Singerhouse and I are going to dive into part 2 of our webinar series here. And again, this is talking about offering virtual engagement as just another tool for Safe Harbor protocol teams to use. And Emily, if you could jump into the next slide so we can just offer some really short introductions for folks. So again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hunter Beckstrom. I use he, him, and his pronouns, and I'm the Prevention Program Coordinator here at the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Singerhouse. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am a consultant for MNCASA and your co-host today. While folks are still coming in, let's take a moment to put in the name, your pronouns, role, what team you're on, and then what brought you in today. I'm going to put that in the chat box as well.
And while folks are just kind of dwelling on that, I know it takes me like a little bit to type that in the chat as well. I just wanted to go over some really quick housekeeping pieces as well. So you'll notice that today's webinar is being recorded. So please, we would love to have your videos be on just for more engagement, but please do whatever is going to be most comfortable for yourself. We are going to have a number of different check-in questions, polls, and other activities throughout, so would love to have all of y'all's engagement. Additionally, please, during those times, feel free to unmute yourself, whatever's going to be most comfortable for you. Otherwise, you are more than welcome to continue using the chat in whatever way you see fit, whether that's asking questions, sharing comments, anything like that. We would love to have as much of that as possible today. There should be let me double check. Yes, so there should be some closed captioning on for folks, but you are more than welcome to turn that off if that is more accessible to you. But also just keep in mind that we do want to have some space for questions at the end of the presentation today as well. But just want to uplift a little bit of the content sharing in the chat. So it looks like we have some folks who joined us, such as John and Annie. Thank you so much. So we have folks from the Wright County team. It looks like Annie, the regional navigator, is with a few different teams. So Clay and Ottertail County, awesome. You have Jessica Nelson here with us as well from Wright County. And then we also have, I think it's Michaela. My apologies if I'm not saying that correctly, but Michaela is from Fond du Lac Human Services. Thank you. And then Mary McRoy, we have another regional navigator on a few different protocol teams, as well as Andrea White. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, folks, for sharing a little bit about yourselves, and hopefully we can just kind of have some more of that engagement throughout today as well.
So we're going to start off with a quick little poll to see who attended part 1. I see some very familiar names in the chat, so thank you again for joining us. But let's start off with a poll just to kind of gauge where we're all at as far as what information you've received. So I'm going to go ahead and start off this poll. And your options are, yes, I did attend part 1, no, and then maybe, I don't remember. It was last week, so lots happened between now and then. And if so, that's quite all right. And hey, Mel, good afternoon. Thanks for coming. Fantastic. So we're going to wait just a little bit. Is that popping up on your end there, this poll? Only seeing results. All right, let's try that one more time. Thank you, Mel. All right, so relaunch, continue. How about that? There we go. Hunter and I were practicing the technical piece of this right beforehand, so I think it registered that we already launched this poll. Lovely. All right, so we have a little bit of a mixed bag here. Some folks who came last time, some folks who did not. and then someone is unsure. So I am going to go ahead and end the poll. Thank you all so much for participating. There we go. We can see our results here. So we've got about 2 of you who have not joined us before. So thanks for coming. I'm going to do a quick overview of what we did last time to remind some folks who did join us, and then to give an overview of what we did for those who didn't see part 1 but would like to see the recording, which we have available as well. So here we go for part 1 overview. We discussed what this project is that we're doing here with MNCASA and myself. Next, we are going over the virtual engagement for teams and what that looks like as a protocol team themselves. We also discuss what virtual engagement can look like in systems. So for example, your system partners, those who are implementing the protocol with you, and then what that can look like for community members. So just your average families, parents, caregivers, adult community members, other organizations and local businesses, etc. So we dove into each section of the community and how virtual engagement can show up with that. We also had a case study in this last section too, to give you a concrete example of what virtual engagement can look like in a protocol team. So today we're going to be going over a little bit more specifics of virtual engagement. Last time was much more of an overview, kind of like a 101 introductory course. But today we're going to be going over some best practices for utilizing virtual engagement. We're going to be doing a section on capacity and resource building where we have an activity built in there for you all. Next, we're going to be going over some concepts for accessibility and equity. And lastly, we'll be discussing how to use evaluation within virtual engagement. All right, so we've used the term virtual engagement. Here's just a little refresher on what that actually means. So we define virtual engagement as interactions between people, organizations to build relationships or conduct activities. So we see virtual engagement as one tool of many that can be added to your toolbox to engage with your team, system partners, and community members to accomplish your goals. So that's just kind of a quick overview of what virtual engagement is. If anybody has any questions on what that kind of is defined as, feel free to put them in the chat and we can answer that for you. And so I'm going to go ahead and kick off our conversation here. And as I said before, if you do have questions, put them in the chat. If you'd like me to slow down as well and re-explain some concepts, I'm happy to do that. Just go ahead and signal that in the chat as well. And so for folks as well who weren't here last time, that may be a great opportunity for you to ask questions to maybe your fellow attendees who were here and can help kind of explain some of these concepts with the information they learned last time. So we're going to start this section off as well with a poll to gauge how comfortable you feel implementing virtual engagement. So I'm going to go ahead and start that. So how comfortable do you feel implementing virtual engagement? We've got a scale here of being very comfortable, somewhat comfortable, uncomfortable, and you're really not sure. So we're going to take a few seconds to do that while folks enter in their answers. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll here. Give you 5 more seconds or so, and then I'm going to stop it and then share out the answers. Okay, lovely. So it looks like we've got some folks who are very comfortable implementing virtual engagement. Good for you. That is absolutely awesome. Some folks who are somewhat comfortable. thanks for coming to this. Hopefully this presentation will lift you up to be very comfortable in implementing virtual engagement. And if by the end of this, you still have questions or want to discuss a little bit more, we'll see how we can get that need filled for you. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, or the poll, I should say, and move on to the next part of the section here. So we've got 3 concepts of virtual engagement best practices. And the first one is finding your people. This is a key one here of identifying who the audience that you're trying to reach is, such as your partners, the people that you want to impact. And identifying this concept is going to help get you to the goals that you are trying to reach through utilizing virtual engagement. So for finding your people, you can start asking yourself the following questions. So who are your partners? Who are the folks that you're trying to connect with? Who are you engaging with? So who are you trying to engage with online? Is that going to be through social media? If so, is it youth? Is it adult? Is it community members? Trying to narrow down who it is you're trying to engage with. Who needs to see the message you're trying to portray or the activities that you're trying to conduct? Who needs to see that? Next, which virtual engagement platform are they located on? So each platform or software that you use is designed for a specific audience. Which of those platforms are these people located on? This will help guide you in which platforms or software you need to use. Is there anything you would add to this piece here?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Emily. So I do think, we have a lot of folks in this space who are very experienced within their own protocol teams and obviously with virtual engagement as well, which is lovely to see. And so I think this can be very reminiscent of the concept that we often talk about in protocol teams and trying to identify champions within your communities. And so I think that can be a very helpful concept to join in onto this space as well. And so really being able to identify, well, if I don't have the right partnerships with, the school district or for law enforcement, who is someone that I can identify in that space that can really help build some more of those partnerships and those networks as well. So really relating this idea of finding your people of virtual engagement and then connected to also, finding those champions as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hunter. Moving on to our next practice, we are going to talk about utilizing hybrid. So this is a really exciting practice that we like to encourage, is to leverage the ability to have people in person and online. This is a classic way to just kind of meet people where they're at. So utilizing hybrid can help increase consistency within your engagement, access to your team and the activities that you're doing. It helps increase flexibility between team members, your system partners, and then the community members you're trying to engage with. And it can also increase your reach within your community. So those people that you're trying to engage with, it can increase if you utilize a hybrid method. For those of you who don't know, hybrid is typically seen within meetings, webinars, events, when people are able to show up on like Zoom or Teams to these set events or activities. And then some folks also join in person. I know some protocol teams are actually utilizing this to conduct their activities already. So we love to encourage folks to lean into this opportunity to have that hybrid option.
Yeah, and Emily, I would just echo that same sentiment that you shared, that a lot of teams have already kind of ventured into this space already, but maybe that there was some hiccups along the way since we've been virtual for so long, like trying to identify what some of those barriers are and how we can really use some of the very positive aspects of both in-person and virtual pieces together, because we know that there are certainly pros and cons to each one, but really trying to emphasize the strengths as much as possible between each of those.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yes, like we said, virtual engagement is a tool of many tools. So trying to emphasize the ability to integrate this where and how you can. Lastly, for our best practices, we have consistency is key. Consistency is very important when it comes to engaging the virtual space for many reasons, but one of them being that you always have that one not that one method, but one of the methods that you can rely on to always be there, especially when it comes to social media. If you're trying to reach people, having a consistent ability to engage online is going to be really, really important to reach others. So how exactly is consistency key, and how can this take place? So we've got some options here. First, plan. This one is a way that you can create a scope, a timeline, a Gantt chart. However it is you best do your planning can help supplement the ability to do consistent virtual engagement. Next, determining roles, resources, and the purpose can also help with this consistency piece. So planning out can really look into all of those different options, but that can really be helpful. Next, strategize. So referring to your strategic plans, mission statements, any funding requirements that you may have to help build off of your current plans and really integrate. We're not trying to recreate the wheel here or create a whole new strategy for your team. That's not what we're trying to do. We want to integrate where we can to really have longevity and long-term sustainability for the protocol teams to integrate this. Change doesn't happen overnight. That's why we kind of have to strategize the ways that we do it. Next is evaluation. So we're going to talk deeper about this as well at the end of our presentation, but evaluation can really be helpful in understanding the ways that you are utilizing virtual engagement. So it helps understand what changes you may need to make, adopt turnover, and really ultimately reach the success that you want to do. And it can help build that consistency by identifying what needs to change or what needs to be emphasized a little bit more.
Emily, I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind explaining what a Gantt chart is. I know that I only recently became informed as to what that is, so maybe that is also some of our audience members today too.
For sure, for sure. So a Gantt chart is kind of like another version of a timeline, except it's typically color coded. I probably don't have, a dictionary definition of a Gantt chart. It's more of like a visual element where you can see the tasks that you're trying to do and how it is going to be completed over time. So typically you have a list of tasks on the left side, and then above is a month schedule or a week schedule, and you can outline where exactly the tasks need to be completed and within each month. So it's kind of like a step up from your basic timeline and a little bit more organized. Would 100% recommend utilizing Gantt charts. There's software out there that can help assist with this, along with most basic ones like Excel has Gantt chart templates that can help supplement this planning process. Thank you, Hunter.
Yeah, no problem. And thank you, Emily. I just know that when I first discovered Gantt charts, I think it was just much more helpful and not only visually appealing, but for folks who are very much so visual learners for timelines, I think that is much more helpful, especially when we're talking about virtual engagement in these spaces as well. But one piece that I just wanted to share here, again, kind of echoing Emily's pieces, is just that, throughout the purposes of, the part 1 webinar and here today, obviously a lot of folks are familiar with how closely related protocol development work is kind of like trying to strategize in these areas of virtual engagement. And so obviously some of the language might be quite similar, but the role that Emily and I are trying to play is just trying to kind of flip the lens as to how to apply this with virtual engagement, or just to turn the light on to the fact that y'all have already been doing some virtual engagement work, but just kind of shedding more light on kind of fleshing that out a little bit more, or tweaking them to just have more, expansive work into the future. So hopefully that is kind of helpful, just keeping in the back of your mind throughout today.
Yeah, that's a great reminder, Hunter, on how many teams, if not all of the teams, are already using virtual engagement. We're just hoping that these resources that we create for you can help intentionalize some of those activities, grow them in ways that make sense to you all, and really meet you where you're at with your current goals. So thank you so much, Hunter, for that reminder. And our last practice here that we like to share every time we chat with folks about virtual engagement is the concept of technology readiness. So this is more of that different levels of ability and comfort to use or adopt technology within efforts. So this is more of like a foundational piece that we like to ensure all folks have the ability in room to connect in ways that make sense and in our own ways. So that could look like building off what's already in place, leaning into others, providing a variety of options, which is very important, and remembering your values, why you're doing what you're doing. Okay, so what other practices are out there? What have you all learned throughout your experience that you would like to share with us or with other team members? We only listed three or four, but there's a lot of other opportunities out there for navigating the virtual space. These could be promising practices, recommendations that you've learned over time, whatever it may be. We'd love to hear from you. And if you feel comfortable, go ahead and unmute. We are happy to chat with you like that as well.
I know that someone in the chat just briefly shared that they're still learning. And again, just want to say thanks so much that you're here learning in this space already. So that's definitely a good first step to be a part of this. I know as folks are still kind of thinking and brainstorming, it was very clear during part one that folks in that space had a lot of really awesome expertise to share. And so I know, keeping in mind going back to part one can be very useful and just utilizing the folks in that space. But yeah, so just to reiterate what Emily is saying and asking here, what are some of the best practices that you all have used in terms of virtual engagement, or maybe not necessarily initially thinking about virtual engagement, but how you have already applied your protocol development, but maybe if you can think of it through a virtual engagement lens, what some of those best practices could be applied in that space.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Hunter. This could be, security, confidentiality, equity, whatever it may be. Feel free to share. We'll probably spend about another minute or so waiting for folks. If you don't have anything to say, that's totally fine too.
I can share one example. I think I might have shared this in our last one, but one of our protocol teams in Olmsted County, what I did is I created a team within Microsoft Teams, and then you can create different channels under that team for different like subgroups or smaller committees. You can also use that channel and on those teams to then create what's the word I'm looking for, like Outlook invites for meeting spaces. You can share files. It's like a SharePoint, if you will. I know it's not that, but I don't have another word for what that is. So it's been really helpful, to share like some of the MNCASA protocol resources to give folks a base, and then to like have like a OneNote notebook connected to the team or the channel. You can take your notes each and every sub meeting or large group meeting. And then if people miss, you can put the recordings of the notes or the files or whatever in there. And they can access it on their own. So we're just getting started down here, but it seemed to definitely help, especially in a larger county with lots of different disciplines in each subcategory, to kind of have that organization. But it's just one example.
It's fantastic. Thank you, Andrea. I'm really hearing a large emphasis on having shared folders and access to shared documents to have that consistent communication. That is really strong. And as we said last time in part one, having the ability to have that shared document can be really important to achieving your goals as a team. Thank you so much for sharing. If folks have other things they want to add, feel free to put it in the chat. I'm going to move on to our next section here. And this one is about capacity and resource building. So this is more of a skill building exercise that we're going to be doing here today to identify capacity and resources within your teams to start using or emphasize your use of virtual engagement. So to start off, we've got capacity assessments for virtual engagement. This can look like staffing, processes, resources, and leadership. So one of the things that we learned throughout our conversations with folks within the protocol teams for the assessment that we completed, capacity was one of the largest pieces or barriers that was a barrier or challenge to folks to utilize virtual engagement in a comprehensive way. So let's break this down, and we're going to do an activity to help identify ways that this can be leveraged. So what we're going to be doing is a quick word cloud activity with each of these sections here. So like I said, we've got staffing, processes, resources, and leadership. For the first one here, we've got staffing. So that can look like the people within your team, how much time is spent doing activities, how much you spend doing virtual engagement or engagement in general, how often is it discussed. These are some core questions to help identify where in your current capacity virtual engagement can be integrated. Okay, so we're gonna take this question here. How do you get the right people to join in on engagement efforts? We're all gonna come together and put in some ideas into a word cloud. I'm gonna put that word cloud access right here into our chat. So if you click the link I just put in the chat, we're going to be using a fun little platform called Mentimeter, as Andrea recommended last time. If you click the link, it will pull up a question. And that's, how do you get the right people to join these engagement efforts? And for folks who have trouble with the link, you can also use this QR code if you'd like to join on your phone. We're going to spend a couple of minutes getting folks adjusted to the platform. And you're already starting, fantastic. So we did have some examples as well to get folks started, and that could be through collaboration. That could be through partnerships or signing MOUs, group agreements, accessibility, events, whatever it may be. Feel free to toss some ideas in on how to get the right people to join in on these engagement efforts. So we've already got folks joining in on this activity. We've got share similar interests, fantastic. That's a great way to get the right people involved, is by having that shared vision and like-minded people along with you. Next, we've got accountability popping up, training, capacity, collaboration, champions, love it. You just invite people. That's a great way to get folks started, is just by sending that invite. Sometimes doing that can be the hardest part, but that's a great way to get the right people involved. Probably going to spend about 30 more seconds to 1 more minute on this. I'm going to pull up the question one more time just so you can see it here. Again, we're trying to identify little ways that you can help increase your capacity for virtual engagement. So again, these questions here are areas that you can help identify where that can take place. So if you answer each one of these questions on your own time or through this word cloud here, that can help guide you by identifying where capacity can be built within virtual engagement. And can you all see the word cloud?
We cannot know, Emily.
Okay, Awesome. So I'm going to share it for you all. Give me 1 second. I got a lot of open windows here. Let's see. Show results. How about now?
Not quite, unfortunately.
Okay, no worries. I'm just going to take this and put it right here.
You could also maybe do the slide, like click next on Mentimeter, the actual slideshow, then we might be able to see it. Nope, I lied.
All right. Well, I'm sure there's a very intuitive way to do it. You should be able to see it now on our screen. Hunter, is that so?
Yes, we can now.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. So as we can see here, folks say collaboration is a great way to get the right people to join these engagement efforts. Education, that's huge. I didn't even think of that one. Educating people on what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how they can get involved. Would anybody like to share what they put or add any commentary to this at all?
I'm happy to share.
Sure.
When I was thinking about it immediately, accessibility came to mind. So depending on the discipline, like what is their capacity to even participate in this project? Who's the right workers? And then do they have access and the language and the education to join the space in a way that's conducive for everyone? So just accessibility, like through so many different ways, almost like, meeting our providers and partners where they're at, like harm reduction, just like we do with our clients. So that's kind of what I first thought of.
Fantastic. It's a great example. Meeting your partners and providers where they're at can really be a great way to increase that accessibility. I mean, keeping in mind the use of technology, the comfortability with using it, and so on. So thank you so much, Andrea. And folks, if you would like to put in the chat as well, or say what you are thinking, feel free to do that as well. I'm going to move on to our next section here, and that is processes. So what exactly your team is doing to integrate engagement into your current practices and activities. So this can look like your strategic planning, your vision and mission statement, how exactly you engage with your partners, how you implement the protocol, how you train on it, etc. What are those processes that enable the activities that you're doing? And some example questions to think about when trying to identify where in your capacity you can integrate virtual engagement, we can start thinking about them as like, how is it currently included in your strategic planning? How satisfied is your team with the current engagement efforts and activities? And then who are the partners that can assist you with your practices and processes? So keep these in mind as you're trying to figure out where to increase your capacity for virtual engagement. And for our next activity, we're going to be focusing on how is engagement currently included in your strategic planning. So if you have the Mentimeter up again, I'm going to go to the next slide. And if you need the link again, it's in the chat. Otherwise, I do have the QR code as well. Let me know if you're having any issues at all, and we can help walk you through anything. Feel free to message Hunter and I individually if you don't feel comfy reaching out for help. We are happy to assist you on a one-to-one basis as well. So the question is, again, how is engagement included in your strategic planning. And that can look like, for example, your goals, vision, outcomes, your community partners through accessibility, engaging with new platforms, or uplifting survivors, however it may be. So this one is kind of a tougher question, which is one of the reasons why we're doing it. It's part of that skill building process, doing the things that are hard and hoping for a good outcome. So we've got some people participating already. Wait about a minute and a half or so, 2 minutes for folks to put their ideas in. I'm going to give about 15 more seconds or so, and then I'm going to share the results. All right, so here's our lovely word cloud. Thank you folks for participating. We've got some awesome answers here. So for example, multiple ways to engage is a great way to include engagement within your strategic planning. Like we said, uplifting what you're already doing. Training, great example here. That's a fantastic way to centralize your goals, and including engagement within your planning is by centering that training and consultation aspect. Collaboration, awesome. Making space, fantastic. Hunter, is there anything that you want to add here to this? Oops.
Not quite, actually. I think later on when I have a couple examples, I want to loop back to some of these really awesome themes and concepts y'all are bringing into these questions.
Awesome, thank you. Like we said, we are going to be talking about some of this a little bit later on, especially that culturally informed piece. And yeah, all right, awesome. Does anybody have anything they want to add off of this? Any comments, thoughts, or ideas regarding this activity? I'll show the word cloud one more time just to jog some thoughts. Gonna wait about 10 more seconds or so, and then I'm gonna move on. Right, awesome. Well, thanks folks for participating in this. I know this question was kind of hard, so I do appreciate your thought and energy that you put into that. All right, so we still have 2 other sections that you can utilize to help identify capacity within virtual engagement. Next one is resources. So thinking about resources, has your team applied for funding or assistance to help increase your engagement and reach within your protocol team? How much? It doesn't have to be funding, but resources will be allocated to increase engagement methods in the next year. And then next, who are partners in the community that can be leveraged for sharing leadership? So within these next two sections here, we won't be doing a word cloud, but feel free to put in the chat if you have any thoughts or answers to any of these questions. Resources are great and one of the highest needs within capacity and resources. So these are some 3 core questions that you can think about when trying to increase your capacity. And lastly, leadership. So how much do you currently support engagement efforts compared to other members on your team? How much of a priority is virtual engagement compared to other priorities that you all have going on? We're all doing so much. It's very easy to have many priorities, and virtual engagement just isn't one of them right now. So maybe we can think about how exactly you can integrate that within your priorities. And lastly, who would the leaders be in implementing virtual engagement methods? Thinking about those champions that we mentioned before in previous sections, who are those leaders that are currently on your team, either facilitating, hosting meetings, whatever it may be, who would be helpful in implementing virtual engagement methods? All right, so something to think about within those questions. Would totally recommend writing these down or referring to this webinar within your team as well. So bringing these 4 sections to your team and proposing these questions would be very helpful for you all to come together and figure out different ways that you can adjust your capacity. Something really awesome about these questions as well, you can utilize them for other topics too. It doesn't have to be just for virtual engagement. So if you're looking to increase your capacity for other things, these might be helpful in doing so.
All right, thank you so much, Emily. And I really think over these next few sections right here, I'm going to apply a lot of the tips, themes, and general ideas that Emily and you all have been sharing through Mentimeter into some of these concepts that I will be sharing here. So once we have this idea of our capacity assessment, we really want to work towards kind of building our plan of virtual engagement. And first and foremost, what we have to do here is really understand what your assessment is telling you, right? And so here, the very first part underneath understanding your assessment is really being able to identify what are those weaknesses, right? So I think on the most recent Mentimeter question we had, someone had shared that you have to acknowledge barriers, right? Not everyone is going to be perfect. We know that issues come up that are totally out of our control, hence the COVID-19 pandemic, right? And so while some of those might not be pieces that we can really tackle ourselves, what are ways that we can try to minimize some of these weaknesses, either that we are in control of or just navigating other ways around that as well. Secondly, here we have what are your current resources? Again, going back to Emily's point, knowing that we have to consider time and funding and staffing. Those are, of course, resources. But for example, what about equipment to actually do a virtual engagement, right? Maybe if you yourself or your team doesn't have access to those resources, being able to find those correct people who might have better access. And again, the importance of making those connections and networking with some of those partnerships as well. The third piece we have here is your strengths. Of course, everyone on the team has strengths, even though maybe not everyone has a huge capacity or is very familiar with virtual engagement. We know that there are a lot of folks on various teams that do. So how can those people help uplift and have that shared knowledge? Because that is certainly going to be a strength as you move forward with, with your plan for virtual engagement in the future. So really trying to, at the same time as minimizing those weaknesses, really trying to reinforce your strengths. Additionally, I think it's really important to identify, the areas in which you are very energetic and passionate about, right? So things that get you really excited. So maybe you want to do some really authentic community engagement through virtual engagement, right? So maybe you want to do some focus groups or interviews with youth with lived experiences, right? I think that can be very energizing, getting a lot of incredible knowledge and wisdom from those folks. And so if there's a lot of energy and shared energy around those ideas, really identify what those areas of excitement are and being able to boost them up to leverage that in the future. And then finally, under here within understanding your assessment in the first place is where are the areas that we can actually grow or fill in some of those gaps. So maybe in terms of virtual engagement, your team has completely aced Instagram as a platform, right? But we know that young folks in the greater community are utilizing so many different types of platforms, whether that is it TikTok or dozens of other ones that I have no idea are out there at this point. Just being able to find time for some capacity to grow in some of those other areas. And again, if you yourself do not have the opportunity or awareness of that, trying to find those partners, those community members who do have some more knowledge in that area. All right, so after we are kind of understanding and analyzing our assessment, now we have to jump into creating our strategic plan here. And so, of course, very similar or reminiscent to how y'all had developed your protocol for your various teams, but of course, we really need to start out with a timeline here. So of course, we really need to have a timeline to make progress toward our desired outcomes and goals. And of course, there are countless reasons as to why our timeline might change or shift, right? And really depending if we have different types of virtual engagement plans, maybe we have one within our general safe harbor protocol team, but we also might have one for our individual disciplines and then for the broader community. All of those are going to look quite different and they might have different timelines attached to them as well. I think we've gone pretty deep into this aspect of partners and networking with folks who might have some more knowledge or resources to share. But again, just really ensuring that that can really uplift your virtual engagement work as well. Additionally, we have to consider roles and responsibilities within our strategic planning. So really clarifying the roles and ways in which people can participate in virtual engagement, and knowing that having some of these shared responsibilities can really prevent burnout and transition in the future. And so knowing that, just like with our coordinators, oftentimes across our safe harbor protocol teams, there might be multiple people who kind of sit on a co-created team or have many different subcommittees with leaders, knowing that that shared experience can, really ensure that the bulk of the brunt of that virtual engagement work, for example, is not just relying on one person. And then finally, as I mentioned with our timeline, we really want to be progressing towards our goals and outcomes as well. And then finally comes the most exciting part, arguably, is actually implementing your plan, right? However, at the same time, we know that actually taking that first step can actually be pretty difficult, right? I think a lot of folks get stuck in this idea of what people call like analysis paralysis. They just want to take into account everything and make sure everything is perfect, but they might see that there's an issue in this area, or they don't have access to X, Y, or Z, and so they never actually take that step of implementation. But even though we know that it can be difficult, we know that we have the resources, the knowledge, and expertise to be able to now navigate and eliminate some of those barriers. And this next part, of course, we know that mistakes are bound to happen. However, I think it's really important to take these as lessons learned. And so one piece that I want to relate to that was shared through the Mentimeter was someone had brought up for that first question of engaging with the right people is this idea of safety. And I really liked that idea because I think that might not initially come to mind right away. And I think it's very important because a lot of teams likely are doing work in the community with people who have lived experiences, right? And I think even from part one, some folks had shared that they had, maybe done a survivor-led panel within their community. So taking that example into account, maybe you're doing a series of a survivor-led panel, and for that very first one, knowing that if it's going to be within your local community and it's virtual, it's likely that community members with lived experiences might join in on that call. And for whatever reason, hearing other people's stories could have been triggering or traumatizing for whatever reason, and they felt that they had to remove themselves to keep themselves safe, for example. And in order to mediate that situation and give that support for those potential folks with lived experiences in your virtual space. Maybe for that second one, since you did make that, you weren't aware of that, or that there was that small mistake that first series, maybe that second one, you can tell everyone in the virtual space from the get-go, hey, we actually have a Zoom room dedicated with multiple breakout rooms with confidential advocates. So if at any time you're feeling unsafe or you're feeling triggered, you can actually click this link to go into another space. So just one example of many different things that might happen within our virtual worlds, and we don't know how to address it right away, but because you're going to keep doing this virtual work in the future, being able to eliminate those mistakes and really look at that as a lesson learned. And of course, really ensuring that you are getting those community members involved, right? And I think it's very important whenever I'm talking about community engagement, I oftentimes say that anything for the community, it really has to be by that community, right? So if you're trying to engage virtually, really ensuring that you are doing that in safe, proper, and effective ways. And I think it's really important, arguably, especially for youth, not to say that all youth are tech savvy or very familiar with social media, but they can be a really great resource to give you more information, wisdom about how to navigate some of these areas, or, you know, what are the platforms that youth are on and what might not be as popular at this time. And then finally, when you are implementing your plan, you really have to go back to the center and root of why you did this in the first place. So what is your purpose? So maybe folks want to do an event series. Maybe they just want to have more general engagement with certain community members. Maybe you want to have broader reach, not just within your local area, but across the state. It really depends on whatever is going to work best for you, but really remembering the purpose of your why here.
Awesome. Thank you, Hunter. So we're going to end off this section with a little chat as well. So based on the practices and activities that were in this section and the last one, how do you anticipate you and your team will utilize this information? So are you yourself going to do a capacity assessment? Are you going to think about the resources you have available? Are you going to talk to your community members, get youth involved? What are you thinking that you and your team will do to utilize this information? We'll spend about a minute or so on this, and then we'll head on over to our next section about access and equity. And if you don't have anything to say on this, or if you have any questions, if something wasn't clear, feel free to also put that in the chat too. We've got, oh, go ahead, Hunter.
I was just going to say probably what you were going to join in on, but just want to uplift what's going on in the chat. So really, it looks like we want to work best to see what works best for our own community, knowing that it's going to be different everywhere. And so, you know, that could actually be getting some community engagement right from the get-go. Like, what would you all like to see in terms of being engaged with virtually? That can be one example too, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So as we've said before in our first webinar, and the purpose of why we're doing this project is to kind of get some protocol teams on the ground with an assessment of the activities. So some teams have reports coming to them, depending on if they were involved at the beginning of the project or not, that kind of help guide the way that this assessment took place and can help identify areas of virtual engagement within the team, depending on the goals that you all have available. But to partner with that, it's important to see what exactly your community wants as well. So implementing an assessment of what exactly your community members are needing and what that might look like for you all. All right, thank you for participating in this part of the presentation. We're going to move on to our next section here about access and equity. And this section is more about knowledge sharing. So we're not really going to have any activities in this one, but we're hoping to really outline different ways that access and equity can be considered within virtual engagement. And so to start off, here are some tips on ways that accessibility can show up in virtual engagement. And that starts off with creating an environment for all visitors. So this can help your attendees by preparing for virtual engagement by leveraging different registration processes and collecting a little bit more information. So for example, will they need accessibility features within your meetings? Are they going to need closed captioning? Do they plan to use video or call in? Are they very experienced using virtual spaces within their engagement, or considering if they need technology help? Are they relying on internet or Wi-Fi to join? Those types of things. So keep in mind the environment that you're creating for all visitors, and assume they all have a variety of technology skills at different levels, and they all have the different tools. So plan ahead to have support there, to like technology support to help troubleshoot during events or meetings. Additionally, keep in mind that you can invite attendees to rename themselves. And if for security reasons, for example, if there's a survivor involved in your presentation or webinar, it's important to remind them that they can change their name if they would like to, and add their personal pronouns to feel a little bit more comfortable in that space. Additionally, as well, we have had in the past, especially with MNCASA, we've had sign language interpreters available during presentations as well. So that can be really helpful for all types of visitors within your meetings. And next, offering alternative methods to access materials. So this can be thinking about the slides that you're sharing, notes, any links that you're dropping into the chat, any scripts that you might have available. It would be important to share this either before or after your presentation. So there can be many opportunities for folks to access your materials. And thinking back as well, some folks might not have access to all the different technology that you're using. I'm thinking like governmental agencies, for example, have a lot of barriers to different technology that they can use. So thinking about if they are able to use SharePoint or OneDrive or Google, Dropbox, whatever it may be, having alternative methods to access materials can be really helpful. Next, provide support to prevent and fix technology challenges. So kind of what I said before, keep in mind security and privacy best practices. It's important to include a co-host whenever feasible as well, to offer some additional support throughout the presentation, and they can help assist with the chat functions or technology. You can also be mindful of different meeting tools and apps that you use. For example, Zoom has chat features, document sharing possibilities, and even websites that can be used throughout to help provide a little bit more support during meetings. Next, equity in virtual engagement, which is a very important piece here. So this can look like having diverse content available. So for example, having people representative of the community in which you reside in within the voices and imagery that you're providing, and then carefully considering your language and how you are presenting your materials. So we know that this is a presentation on its own, equity and virtual engagement. We can really dive super deep into this, but we're really just going to be a little bit more surface level here. And if you need a little bit more clarification, feel free to ask for that as well. Again, also digital content does allow us to reach more people than we would have in the first place. However, there are still many people out there without internet access and without the ability to engage in the same ways as others. So it's important to ensure that this section here, but this idea of equity and virtual engagement is carefully considered in the ways that you're talking about virtual engagement. So I also have some resources here that I will be sharing at the end of this presentation. Actually, let me see if I can get those in here now. So I've got some resources on messaging tips that will be helpful for you all. So let's see. Sorry, bear with me for 1 second. Here we go. All right. Here is a resource for messaging. Another resource for online facilitators and thinking about diversifying your content and how that might look for you. All right. So next we've got inclusive facilitation. So ensuring that you're providing a space for people to engage during meetings of all people of all different types of backgrounds and opinions. Can't be a siloed idea or opinion here. It's important to have all folks included, even if they don't agree with you or have a similar background than you. Next, providing space for personal reflection is going to be really important to include equity in virtual engagement. Having that moment to reflect on the topics and conversations that you are thinking about is going to be really key in creating that safe and inclusive environment. All right, so it looks like we've got the resource in there for facilitators. That's going to be really key. The last one I just shared for folks who are thinking about ways that they can be more inclusive within their meeting facilitation. All right, and lastly, creating space. So we've touched on this as well, but really try to spend some time finding out what is comfy for folks to tune in. Is it hybrid? Is it virtual? Is it in person? Using video or not using video? It's important to kind of think about those different things, and the ways that visual learners also approach conversations is going to be different than folks who are not visual learners. So you have to design for different learning processes and styles that are going to be fitting for all different types of learning. And then thinking about accessibility as well, creating a space that is accessible for others. And on that same note as well, there are other great resources that Hunter is putting in the chat. Thank you, Hunter. Doing a million things at once here, of course, like always. There is 2 resources here, one called a racial equity tool, which helps give resources during this COVID-19 time, and then having groups online. There's also another resource here as well that I'm going to put in. It's called Mural. You've probably heard of it before. It's a really great collaboration tool that can help mirror some brainstorming sessions or poster board, mind maps, designing, whatever it may be. It can be really helpful to have collaboration in a really accessible way for folks who are in person or online, depending on what space you have. Annie loves Mural. That's great to hear. I would compare it to Jamboard, if you've ever heard of that before. It's a classic Google software. All right, so last few pieces here, some considerations regarding access and equity. So consider access to technology and platforms, different protocols and regulations that we mentioned before, different levels of expertise, and shared ownership. All right, again, we've emphasized this already. So thinking about your audience, who exactly you're trying to engage with, their access to the internet technology, utilizing them in your community in a really respectful and inclusive way, and ensuring you have equitable partnerships, especially with survivors, where both people are getting something out of this relationship and within this engagement together. You know, it's not just take, it's also a give and take relationship. All right, and what are other ways that we can help increase accessibility and equity in the virtual space? We all have a variety of different experience with this. Is there something that you've learned that you want to share with the group on access and equity? And it doesn't have to be in the virtual space either, even in person or within your hybrid methods. What are other ways that we can increase equity and accessibility in our spaces? So I'm going to put the question in the chat here as well, so everybody can see it. Probably spend about a minute or so on this, and then we'll move on. Feel free to unmute as well if you'd like to share verbally any other ways that we can increase accessibility and equity within our virtual spaces.
I just want to point out everything that you've been doing, Emily, to increase accessibility and equity. You're asking the question and offering if people want to come off camera on mic, and then you're putting it in the chat for people who would like to read or feel more comfortable doing it that way.
Well, thank you, Mel. We try to do that over here as much as possible, but we're always open to learn. Annie mentioned that they've been, I've been working with NHTTAC and OTIP, Equity and Inclusion Initiative. Can you remind me what that very long acronym is, NHTTAC?
Yeah, sorry. NITAC is National Human Trafficking Training and Technical Assistance Center. I was just going to add that we've been utilizing throughout the process most of the tools that you guys were suggesting here for engagement. And so as you're like listing these off, I'm like, man, people are so much smarter than me. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad a lot of this has been brought up before, and other programs and organizations are also doing that as well. It's really great to be reinforcing one another throughout a work. And Annie, if you have that link available to their initiative, feel free to drop it in the chat. I think sharing that knowledge that they're also doing, that you're leveraging as well, is going to be really important. All right, lovely. Well, we're going to move into our last section here. Unless anybody has any other questions or comments, I'm going to move on. Okay, awesome. So Annie said there isn't a link just yet, but we'll keep me updated as long as tools are being released. So once we get them, we'll try to share them with our folks, and hopefully you can access them as well. But keep an eye out for the Equity and Inclusion Initiative. All right, so now we're going to be talking about evaluation, one of my favorite sections when it comes to anything and everything. Evaluation is a very key and foundational initiative and effort that you can take place in. So we're going to start off with a lovely poll, as always. How familiar are you with evaluation? I'm going to put it in the chat here as well. How familiar are you with evaluation? And now we're going to go ahead and launch this poll. So your options are: you are an expert, you know everything about evaluation, know exactly what it is. Some folks might be pretty familiar, done it a couple of times. You can identify it when you can. You're neither familiar or unfamiliar, totally neutral, totally fine. And then you're unfamiliar as a whole, or you could be completely unsure, never heard of evaluation ever, which is totally fine, but would recommend looking into it. All right, so it looks like everybody's answered this question. Fantastic, thank you. I am going to end the poll now and go ahead and share out some results. So we've got some people who are pretty familiar and somewhat familiar, so it's not a completely unknown concept, which is fantastic news for me, somebody who's a lover of evaluation. So just as a refresher then, evaluation is the process of critically examining or understanding your efforts by collecting information about the activities that you're doing, characteristics of them, and what your outcomes are. So this is a purpose to understand the efforts, their effectiveness, and how to plan for the future. I'm going to stop sharing this poll as well. So to break this down, we've got two different types of evaluation out there. There's process and impact. So process is an evaluation type that is more logistical, trying to understand, was this effort or activity delivered as we wanted it to? How did it go? Did it reach the intended audience? Were the people who we wanted to be there in attendance? Did it produce the desired outcomes? And then next for impact, this is more of a long-term evaluation type. This helps discuss the effectiveness of those efforts or activities. Was there any change in knowledge, belief, or perspectives? And how successful were those efforts? Was everything, what went right, what went wrong, how, why, and what can you do better in the future? All right, so like I said, process and impact, these are the two categories that evaluation is broken up into. There's more depending on who you ask, but these are two that I personally like to rely on to guide evaluation practices.
All right, well, thanks so much, Emily, for kind of giving a general background as to both of these core components of evaluation being process and impact. But now, just for the next few slides, we're going to dive into just a few examples as to how this can be applied to safe harbor protocol teams, for example. So number one here under process, we have what we suggest to be updating your MOUs or memoranda of understanding. And so if this is kind of your first venture into doing formalized virtual engagement work, it's quite likely that you might have to go back and update some of those agreed upon understandings between all of those disciplines within your safe harbor protocol team. Next, we also have being able to track some of your different analytics or measurements as well. So what are you actually intending to measure when you are trying to do some of this evaluation work? And so do you have a system in place to monitor your virtual engagement reach? And what is the community that you are trying to do this in? Is it just within your local community or statewide as well? And then, of course, staffing changes is very important here. I know that everywhere it seems like there's so much transition nowadays, and it's really difficult, and people are constantly at capacity, right? But I really think it's very important that teams, systems, disciplines, whatever it might be, really try to have a system in place, because two of the main reasons in my mind why work such as virtual engagement would be halted after a staff transition is, number one, that was the only person doing the virtual engagement work on that team. And if no one else kind of is bearing some of those shared responsibilities, all of it stops once that person leaves the team or organization. Or number two, even if there's multiple people working on it, on virtual engagement, there's not an easily applied system that everyone can work on that together. And of course, that's why it's so important to have these plans or protocol developed in place on your team, and especially, of course, here in virtual engagement as well. But now those are some of the examples of process. Now we're going to jump over to impact here. And I think first and foremost, a lot of people think of surveys right away when we're talking about examples of evaluation here. But importantly, not only do we have to hear and take in the feedback, we really have to ask ourselves, well, now what? What are we actually going to do with the feedback, right? Because that really explains how we're going to improve upon our future evaluative work in our virtual engagement as well. Some other examples here are doing focus groups or interviews. I think arguably it can be difficult, whether you are trying to do this in person, which historically that has been happening. But now I've been a part of situations where we have had the opportunity to be doing these focus groups and interviews virtually as well. And of course, some mistakes are made or things are a little bit clunky at first, but then being able to go back to your original plans and ensuring that you're smoothing that out and making that the best experience for especially those with lived experiences involved in those. And then finally, making sure that your evaluation, based upon that, you are actually getting the info that you intended to receive in the first place. And so if you are generally trying to get and extract information on your capacity for your team to actually do virtual engagement, are you coming up with completely opposite results as to what you were expecting? And if that's the case, you might have to tweak some of those factors that were a part of your initial assessment as well. So here are just a few examples, both within process and impact here that y'all can consider.
And I'm just going to also add here as well. So simply put, you could think about process and impact in two different ways. I like to think about it in process as in like more of that quantitative aspects, so it's like counts, numbers, visually seeing an increase or decrease in those percentages or something like that. I like to think of process as quantitative. Impact is more that qualitative data that you're getting, you know, visually, I'm sorry, not visually, but verbally. You can get descriptions, have conversations with people, have a little bit more in-depth information about what is going on within your activities. So try to break it down like that. I'm not sure if it was helpful. Hopefully it was, but something to think about.
Awesome. And thanks so much. That's always helpful to be able to share that perspective to Emily. And now I know that we have just over 10 minutes left, but we really want to reserve the last chunk of time for an activity. So just want to offer a quick reminder for folks who are a part of part one, but then also just to update for those who might not have been a part of part one here. And so we actually took a little bit of a deep dive into a case study that we had done on Polk County in Minnesota. And Polk County, if folks are unfamiliar, is located in the northwestern corner of Minnesota. And during that, in part one, we really analyzed the prevalence of exploitation via Minnesota Student Survey data in Polk County. And then we actually created our own Safe Harbor Protocol team in Polk County. And then after that, we really tried to identify some strategies of virtual engagement that the Polk County Safe Harbor team could actually implement on their own. And so, of course, you didn't need to be around for that, but on the next slides, you're actually going to see how we can take some of these different options of either processy or impact evaluation and how we can actually utilize those for your own work.
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to take that Polk County case study and have a cute little quiz or, maybe like a question or answer multiple choice on what evaluation methods can be best used with the virtual engagement strategies that we're going to be presenting in the next slides. So I'm going to put the question here in the chat as well, so you can see it and think about it as we're going over the next few slides. So first one here, social media was a strategy that we gave as an example for Polk County in this case study. So they partnered with, hypothetically, they partnered with Northwest Food Bank to co-create posts educating about food insecurity and exploitation on Instagram. Additionally, they sponsored Instagram posts that promote the food drive that the protocol team will be tabling at. So thinking about this strategy here, I'm going to launch a poll. Which of these evaluations should be used here? And it is a select all that apply. Would you use analytics tracking, signed MOU tracking, attendance tracking, surveys, interviews? None. Are there other options that you would utilize to evaluate this virtual engagement strategy? If you need me to restate the question, feel free to do so. We'll take about a minute and a half, depending on how quickly folks participate in this. All right, we're going to take about 15 more seconds here, and then I'm going to end the poll. Okay, lovely. I'm going to thank you all for participating. And here are our results. So we've got some folks saying analytics tracking, signed MOU tracking, attendance tracking. surveys, interviews, and focus groups. Does anybody have any opinions about what they think is the best evaluation method? So personally, I would probably use attendance tracking for sure, and analytics tracking to understand how many people are engaging with us on Instagram. Next, signed MOU tracking is a great way to do it as well, to get some insight on how many partners kind of came out of this Instagram promotion, and then also tabling at the food drive. And then surveys very well could be used as well to get more in-depth information about what went right, what went wrong. You could also use focus groups as well. I probably wouldn't do it for this one specific effort, but after maybe a few different efforts, getting people involved who were involved in those activities together to get some insight about what you guys should be doing or what you missed, or etc., whatever it may be. That's what I would probably do. Hunter, is there anything that you'd like to add to this piece?
I don't believe so. No, thanks, Emily.
Okay, lovely. So we're going to move on to our next one here. This one is newsletter. So before, in our first one, we had in Polk County, they partnered with the county school district and community center by utilizing a platform called MailChimp to send monthly or weekly newsletters that include positive activities for youth to parents, community members, and youth serving partners to ensure that youth have after-school activities to engage in the community. So which evaluation method should be used here? Probably spend about a minute on this one, and then we're going to move on. Again, same options: analytics tracking, signed MOU tracking, attendance, surveys, interviews or focus groups. None at all. Don't evaluate. Or if you have other options or ideas, feel free to toss them in the chat. All right, lovely. Thank you folks for participating. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share out the results. Feel free to add if you'd like to give some opinions about which one you would personally use. I agree, for sure, use analytics tracking. Definitely sign MOU tracking because you're engaging with many different partners to get this information. Are people attending these activities? Attendance tracking for sure. And then definitely using a survey. Like I said, interview focus group, maybe not for this one, but definitely consider it in the future. All right, so I'm going to use hybrid training as well. So this is our last poll here. Hybrid training is something that we've all been talking about doing. And for Polk County, they decided to partner with their protocol team members to offer this, to train on their protocol, to engage system partners who are normally able to be trained, and then also have a training available for people who are new. So I am going to launch this poll here. Which evaluation methods should be used to understand a hybrid training? Spend about 30 seconds to 1 minute on this one, and then we're going to move on. Right, about 5 more seconds here. Thank you, thank you. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll. Share out the results. So a lot of folks said attendance tracking, surveys, interviews, and focus groups, sign that MOU and that analytics tracking. So I would personally for sure use interviews and focus groups. I think that's a great way to better understand how to improve this hybrid training. Survey, same thing as well. We like to have feedback questionnaires after our presentations and trainings. So definitely try to implement those. Attendance tracking, it's going to be huge to see if there's any difference between virtual versus hybrid versus in-person trainings. Sign MOUs, maybe give or take, depending on who you have involved. And then analytics tracking could definitely be helpful, depending on where you have this training available online. If it's on YouTube, fantastic. Use those analytics to better understand how it's being utilized. All right. Ending out here now. We'd love to open it up the chat to see what are you all taking away from this moving forward? How will you start your engagement? Feel free to drop it in the chat. Any answers or feedback that you may have. I'm going to move to our last slide here so you can see our emails as we're ending out here. All right, so I'm putting our emails in the chat for you all to reach out if you have any more questions, if you want to talk virtual engagement, you want to ask questions about the materials that we presented here today, or if you just want to say hi, we would love to do that because we are concluding our part 2 of our webinar series. And again, just want to say thank you to you all for attending, being engaging, and awesome participants.
Yes, I'll second that as well, Emily. So thank you so much to folks. Just before folks head out and everything, we would love to hear some feedback on this survey questionnaire that I just threw in the chat. And then also just want to share, be on the lookout for an email with all of the content recording and presentation slides from both part 1 and part 2. Once we get all of that information piled together. So just wanted to share that. I know that Annie had thrown in the chat that they're in the beginning of some steps for a couple of different county teams and likely utilize many of the tools, but starting with the planning and assessment tools, of course. Yeah, I think as Emily had mentioned before, really actually just utilizing those exact questions that were found in the slides can be very informative as to how you want to move forward with your own virtual engagement assessment.
Awesome. Thanks so much, folks, for participating. And please take our feedback questionnaire. We would always love to learn more about how to improve.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you.